Chapter 9. Wade's 10-cent tour. James Bond had visited St. Petersburg only once before, but that was in the middle of the Cold War, when it was still Leningrad, and his memories of the city remained very clear. He recalled its beauty, the sense of history, for this place was founded by Peter the Great, had become Russia's centerpiece, its window on Europe. It was also the cradle of the October Revolution, something a lot of people would now prefer to forget. On his last visit, he had come as an enemy. He knew the score and was aware that anyone could betray him. This time, on arriving at St. Petersburg's International Airport, he could almost smell the decay and the lack of direction which had come with the downfall of communism. Like many others, he felt that had the changes come from within the Communist Party, Russia would not have been in the freefall, crime and drug-infested bankruptcy which stemmed from the sudden collapse of a ruling government. Instead of surveillance teams, Bond now kept a wary eye out for criminals. The queue for taxis was made up mainly of well-dressed businessmen, the Western captains of industry trying to cash in on the needs of this emerging new Russia and make themselves an honest penny on the way. He spotted his contact just to the right, away from the queue. Big, burly, and reading a Russian gardening magazine. As he walked up to the man, Bond smiled and spoke the contact phrase. "In London, April is a spring month." The American accent was almost too obvious. "What are you, the weatherman?" Bond scowled, and the American continued. "Codes, cloak and dagger. That's all gone, pal. Come on, the car's over there." He led the way to a piece of scrap metal that had once been a Moscovich, but it was Bond who leaped to open the door with an, "Allow me." The American began to slide into the driver's seat, a broad grin on his face, until Bond trapped him between seat and door. His pistol, carried onto the aircraft in the special briefcase which shielded it from the magic eyes and metal detectors, jammed into the man's side. "Now, talk to me." His face had taken on the granite look of anger. There was a long silence. Then, "Okay. In London, April is a spring month, while in St. Petersburg, we're freezing our asses off. That near enough?" Bond shook his head. "No. Show me a rose." "Ah, Jesus H. Christ." He undid his belt, and while Bond shielded him from the onlookers, the bulky American showed him a small tattoo of a rose on his right hip. Under the rose, there was one word. Muffy. "Muffy?" Bond asked, then went to the passenger door and slid in beside the American. "Yeah, Muffy. Third wife." The American stuck out his hand. "Jack Wade, CIA." "Bond, James Bond. And you know where I'm from." "If I didn't know, I would now. You guys never change. Cold War's over, yet you still go around with your codes, your cloak, your daggers." "The idea is to remain as safe as possible. I thought the CIA still understood the meaning of tradecraft, and the fact that we're all still in business." Wade started the engine, which coughed and spluttered, then fired properly. It sounded like an old two-stroke lawnmower. "We do." He laughed. "I knew who you were. Thought I'd have some fun." "Well, I wouldn't advise it. Keep to the rules and regulations, or you might just find yourself sharing a cell with your nice Mr. Ames. Or worse. I understand the KGB have merely changed their name. With the instability around here, we could all find ourselves back in business as usual again. Ah, the great game, as you Brits call it. He slowly eased the car out into the traffic. I haven't heard anyone call it the great game recently, except melodramatic authors and journalists. Wade lifted his eyebrows. Okay, Jim. James. Bond snapped. Never Jim, and certainly not Jimbo. Okay, sorry. I thought I'd just drive you around so that we can talk. Show you the sights, as it were. The car's clean? Except for the exterior and a few Snicker wrappers. He threw the magazine he had been reading into the back seats. You do any gardening? Not if I can help it. Now, you're the local expert, so let me hear your words of wisdom. Wisdom isn't really in fashion over here at the moment. They told me you wanted some information. I've been ordered to give it to you. So what do you know about Janus? Hey, look at those buildings. Isn't this the most wonderful city you've ever seen? Look, the Winter Palace. And there's the Alexander Column. You got one like that in London, yes? Some sailor. Admiral Lord Nelson, yes. Mr. Wade, don't play the goofy yank with me. Now, Janus. You could write what I know about Janus on a pinhead, James. In a word, zilch. Zipski. That's 2 words. Let's have some more. Seriously, there are very few on the subject of Janus. Nobody claims to have seen him. That's because they'd be admitting they knew him, but there's no doubt that he's connected. He has lines into government, the military, even the Russian intelligence service. A rose by any other name. KGB. Also, the rumor is that he lives on an armored train. An armored train, like the one so popular with the leaders of the revolution. Well, I wouldn't know about the revolution, but that's the story. Where the devil would he get an armored train? Easy. You can get almost anything if you can afford it. As you're taking Jack Wade's 10-cent tour of Petersburg, let me show you a couple of things before you check into your luxury 51-star hotel. Wade drove them down the Nevsky Prospect, across one of the many bridges, and onto the aptly named across the Neva Avenue. From there he headed out into the suburban St. Petersburg, making occasional comments. See that decaying pile of buildings? Flapping a hand in the direction of a series of large, block-like structures. That was one of the largest military bases in the city. It just got left when the Sovs were still in power, and it's gone to pieces since the communists were outlawed, because there isn't enough money. When the boys came back from Afghanistan, there were just not enough barracks or housing for them. Veterans home from the war. That place could have kept a regiment. They just let it fall apart. Later, he told Bond that the Hermitage, the world-famous museum of art, part of the Winter Palace, had grave problems, not the least of which was serious rising damp. They've also got the Germans and the French demanding their paintings back. Bond nodded. And most of the stuff didn't belong to Germany anyway. All plundered from Nazi-occupied Europe, and then plundered by the Red Army when they moved into Berlin. Finally, almost out into the country, Wade stopped his ancient car and led Bond over to the top of a high embankment from where they could look down on a huge railway siding. The buildings, loading bays and platforms were all in a state of decay, but the actual railway lines seemed clean and clear of debris. A military depot, Wade explained. This was the Petersburg area ICBM marshalling yard, the place where they loaded those intercontinental ballistic missiles that used to have us worried. The ones they ran around the country on trains, so they were rarely in the same place twice. They also took them out to silos from here as well. This where Janus gets his armored train? Bond's voice took on a serious tone. There's a lot of old rolling stock around, yes. Most of the moving missile trains were heavily armored. They also had armored carriages for important military and political figures, so they could travel around in the proverbial lap of luxury. During the return journey back to the center of the city, Wade gave him a huge grin. I'll show you something else, James. A little place they call Statue Park. Like the railway depot, it was on the outskirts of the city, a park in name only. Yes, there were trees, and at one time the place had probably been a small park, for there were also a couple of benches, but no formal paths. At first, Bond thought it could be an exhibition of modern sculpture, but as they left the car, he saw that the sculpture was not modern, nor was it in finished state. Strewn between the trees, scattered around the more open spaces, he saw statue upon statue, symbol upon symbol, ruined, broken, ripped from plinths, dragged from original sites, carted here, and dumped like trash thrown into a landfill. The statues were of people like Marx, Lenin, and there was a lot of Lenins, and great metal or stone hammer and sickle emblems. They came in different sizes, from very large to medium. He thought that any active communist could pick up anything from a small to an extra large Lenin. On one of the medium Lenin statues, done in bronze, someone had spray painted an instruction in Russian. Even if Vladimir Ilyich Lenin had been alive, it would have been anatomically impossible for him to obey that particular order. You see, James? Wade grinned. When Yeltsin outlawed the Communist Party, people could not go out and shoot or beat up the old communist leaders. So they were forced to do the next best thing. They toppled all the icons of the communist regime. Lenin, Marx, even the odd Stalin, who should have been moved on long ago anyway. Statues in stone and metal. The people went out and threw them down. Pushed, pulled, used bulldozers or tow trucks. It was a real mess. Then the city began to clear things up. They dumped all the statues in this crummy little park close to the municipal landfill. The trees here were to shield visitors from the fetid horror of the city dump number 4. Now they're not bothered by people seeing this stuff. It certainly wouldn't bother me. Wade grinned again. You know what's funny, James? Real funny? There are people in this very city who think the current administration stinks. People who will not walk past this place, because there are some old statues of Stalin buried here, even though he was condemned after his death. I've heard people say about Boris Yeltsin's regime that things were better under Stalin. Bond shrugged. I've heard people in England say they were happier in World War II than they are now under incompetent government. They say, in the war, we at least knew where we stood. I know what they mean. Strange life, James. Strange old life. Wade flapped his hand at a swarm of flies that were gathering. Back in the car, driving to the hotel, Bond dragged him back to the subject of Janus. You want to hear what else I know about Janus? Zilch, you said. Sure. Well, the truth is that you don't find this guy. He finds you. The only thing I can do is point you in the general direction of his main competition. Nowadays, they got one of those keep your friends close and your enemies closer kind of things going. Geez, it really is like the old-style mafia here. I sometimes think they've all seen Brando do his Godfather bit. Okay, who's Janus's main competition? A real old KGB guy. Got a bad limp. Right leg. Name of Zhukovsky. Valentin Dmitrovich Zhukovsky. You know the guy? I gave him the limp. Natalia risked the first hard currency store she could find. At least, she thought, I'll know if they have the dogs really close on my heels, or if it's only the militia, the police, and the intelligence people. She had used the public bathrooms at the Moskovsky Vokzal railway station as soon as she arrived, and the soap she had been given was not quite as bad as she had expected, but that was probably because she had tipped the bath lady one precious green dollar. With her body clean and her hair washed, she had eaten at the little cafeteria near the station exit. The coffee was like dishwater, but at least it was hot, and the sandwich of black bread and goat's cheese was tasty. After the meager meal, she had headed straight out for the hard currency store. She needed a good thick skirt, changes of stockings and underwear, a couple of pairs of jeans, some warm shirts, toiletries, an airline carry-on bag, and a large leather shoulder bag. Natalia had no idea where she was going to spend the night, but that could wait. She had thought of getting a train to Novgorod, then a local to where her parents still lived on the shore of Lake Ilmen, but she knew that it could put her father and mother at risk. If they were looking for her, the first thing she would have done was to put a team of surveillance people onto the house. Better to stay away than risk the rest of her family. In the women's crowded changing room, she put on new clothes. Her fur coat, hat, gloves, and the leather boots were acceptable, but she carefully checked her papers, moving them into the shoulder bag, together with things she would need. The remainder of her clothes, including those she had been wearing, went into the carry-on. As she was checking her papers, she remembered the official-looking document she had been given over a year ago when she had gone on special assignment to collect computer hardware. Until now, she had forgotten its existence. This could be useful. She tied her hair back into a severe bun and looked at the general effect. It would work, she thought, as she was jostled by a couple of other women in front of the one long mirror. This pair was safe enough. Fat officials' wives out on a spending spree. They had eyed her too closely to be surveillance people, and she had caught the jealous look that one of them had flashed at her when she had stood half naked, revealing her slim, firm figure. Out on the streets again, in the Gostiny Dvor arcade, the Merchants Arcade, St. Petersburg's main shopping area, she window shopped until she found a store selling computers. The window dressing did not bode well. Out-of-date IBMs and Apple Macs with tiny hard drives, obsolete chips, and a minimum of RAM took pride of place. Natalia breathed deeply and walked into the store. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the manager looking her over and not putting her very high on the food chain. He hesitated as she looked at the primitive machines. Then, as she moved a pace towards the door, he came up to her and asked, "Yes?" in a tone he almost certainly reserved for menials. She wrinkled her nose, as though indicating that both the manager and the wares on show were giving off the scent of spoiled fish. "Are these all you have?" she asked. Sarcastically, the manager raised his eyebrows. "How many do you want?" She dug her hand into the big shoulder bag, consulted the influential-looking document. "Well, 24 for the American school, 11 for the Swedish. They must be IBM compatible with at least 500 megabyte hard drives, CD-ROM, and 14.4 modems. We have to keep them in line with the ones they already use." The manager's attitude switched from disdainful to fawning. "We are talking hard currency here, yes?" "What other kind is there?" "If Madame requires a demonstration." "Madame requires one demonstration model, and a quiet place to test it for an hour or so." "Of course." He snapped his fingers at a junior salesman, and together they led her through to the back of the store, where an up-to-date 486 was set up on a spacious desk. "Just leave me alone. The order will depend on what I find here. I need peace." Booting up the machine as she spoke. Almost before they were out of the room, her fingers started to fly over the keys. She was online and typing into madvlad at mosu.comp.math. "Urgent. You call Natalia at 3422-589836. Then she waited. If Boris had lived following the disaster, he would have managed to get access to a computer by now. He was not a whole man unless he was surfing or listening out. Nothing. The minutes ticked away, and with them the optimism. Her computer beeped, and there he was, on screen, or at least a wild cartoon graphic of him. The screen cleared, and the message ribboned out. "Thought you were dead." She smiled and could have wept with happiness as she replied, "Urumov killed everyone, fired Petya, and took GoldenEye." It took a couple of minutes, but the answer slid back onto the screen. "You aren't safe. Trust nobody. Meet me tomorrow, 6 p.m., Church of Our Lady of Smolensk." She had a day to wait. Now all she had to do was find somewhere to sleep without being wakened by some cop putting handcuffs on her wrists. "Do you ever stop talking, Jack?" Bond was fast becoming irritated with Jack Wade's constant patter. The Grand Hotel Europe had provided Bond with a good bedroom and decent food. There were also extras, which he constantly turned down. They even called his room on the in-house telephone. "You want a nice friend for the night?" most of them would say. Bond was very polite, but eventually took the telephone off the hook. Wade had picked him up in the Moscovich promptly at 9. They had spent much of the morning touring the city and taking odd detours, many of which could prove helpful. Do I ever stop talking, James? Rarely. You need the grand tour, so I'm giving it to you. St. Petersburg is an excellent example of a cross-section of the new Russia. See, the homeless on the streets. Roughly matches that of your own inner cities in the States. Oh, you been to London lately, James? Yes, and New York, also DC. I think you have the edge on the homeless situation. Look more carefully, friend. The Russian Federation has the real edge. As well as the homeless and hungry, you can see a kind of blurred mirror image of the West. The expensive cars, suits, dresses. On one level, these people have learned a lot. They do seem to have learned about the unacceptable face of capitalism. I'll give you that. They've also learned about the unacceptable crime of capitalism. It may be bad in the States, but here it's really a going concern. I did tell you how I got into gardening, didn't I? Several times, Jack. Now, how about showing me what I really came here to see? Okay, James. He turned into a side street in which even Bond would hesitate to walk alone at night. Very pretty. He saw the dismal faces and hungry eyes staring from doorways and windows. At the end of the street, a couple of whores made to approach the car as it slowed down. Jack Wade shouted a fast line of Russian abuse at them, and they jumped back quickly. I know those words. Bond smiled. Only I haven't heard them spoken before. Very necessary, James. Now, pay attention. We're coming to an interesting area. As we make a right here, take note of the building on your left. Bond sat back, his eyes flicking towards the sign above the doleful-looking shop, reading aloud. Kirov's funeral parlor. I suppose you're going to tell me this is the dead center of St. Petersburg. Very droll, James. That's the place I was telling you about. 4 o'clock this afternoon, the hearse comes in through those big wooden doors next to the shop. They do the business, and the hearse is out in 10 minutes. I can put the word out if I don't hear from you by 3. Makes sense. Good insurance is hard to find. Sure. Hang on. We've got to take a left here, then your eyes'll pop. The battered old car swung into a broad alley, and Bond saw a sight so bizarre he could hardly believe it. Several expensive cars were parked along the street. Handfuls of well-fed, very well-dressed, smooth-looking Russians leaned against the cars. Less kempt men stood against walls, their wares spread out at their feet. In the boot of every car, the back of every truck, and along the pavement, weapons were stacked. AK-40s, grenade launchers, handguns, Uzi and H&K submachine guns, boxes of ammunition. Jack Wade grunted, then reassumed the role of tour guide. Welcome to the shopping mall of death, the Wild East. This, for Russia, is capitalism's finest hour. One size maims all, and everyone can make a killing. Kinda like East LA, right? I'm happy to say I've never been to East LA. Well, good for you, James. Hang on, we turn right at the top of this nice little marketplace. Zhukovsky has a joint here, at the end of the street. He pointed to what appeared to be the entrance of a nightclub. By 10 at night, this place is really jumping, but your old friend does his business by day. He turned right into the alley, which seemed to be deserted. Your best way in is through any of the doors on this side. Just get in and follow the smell. You'll find him soon enough." He pulled over to the curb, and Bond was out of the car and into the shadow of a doorway long before Wade had even put the car in gear. The wall and the doors made the place look like an abandoned warehouse, but he had seen many such places as this. Shells built around existing, well-constructed places. He reached for his wallet and pressed hard on one of the metal protective edges. A secret compartment opened up to disclose an entire set of lock-picking tools. He wondered if Valentin Zhukovsky was still as careful about locks as he used to be, back in the bad old days when he worked for the KGB. At that time, Zhukovsky had a mania for unbeatable locks and the most sophisticated electronic alarm systems. It seemed that his old adversary had lost his cunning. Bond was through the door and making his way silently up the stairs in 3 minutes flat. Above, in the distance, he could hear someone singing just off-key enough to be grating on the nerves. Valentin Zhukovsky was big, tall, broad-shouldered, and with an elephantine girth. He had a moon face, so much so that people said he must be related somehow because he had all the craters and pockmarks to go with it. His club, which was simply known as Valentin's, was luxurious in an old-fashioned, red plush, gold-fringed manner. At this moment, there were several people sitting around, obviously doing business of one kind or another. Judging by the type of people, talking as low as they could, the business was, if not criminal, certainly bordering on the breaking of laws. Zhukovsky wore a creased and crumpled white suit, which looked a size too big for him until he stood up and revealed that its voluminescence was necessary for his bulk. Half a dozen scantily dressed young women waited on tables and pointed out certain favors they could bestow if you ordered from the reverse side of the menu. The most innocent of these was a normal massage. On a raised dais at one end of the room, another young woman, very attractive and clad in red sequins, battled with Raining in Baltimore by Counting Crows, but she could not quite make the song come to life. It was possible that, apart from being hampered by not being able to carry a melody, she did not understand the words. Zhukovsky had spent the past hour with a reedy-looking, ferret-faced Pakistani arms dealer of very doubtful provenance. They closed no deals, and the Pakistani was just about to leave when Zhukovsky suddenly focused his attention on a small TV monitor, about the size of a playing card, set into the table where he always sat. The monitor gave out a tiny beep, and the picture came on. Zhukovsky glanced down, then did a double take, as he saw who had entered by picking a lock to one of the side doors. He smiled as the picture followed the intruder slowly up the stairs. Then his smile became almost benevolent. Lazily, he gestured to a man who had the makings of a pair of gorillas, and said something to him. He then stood and walked with his lumbering limp towards a pair of red velvet curtains to the right of the dais, where the singer was losing her battle with the song. He passed through the curtains and showed no surprise when the muzzle of an automatic pistol was laid coldly on his neck, just behind the ear. "Ah," he breathed, as though in a kind of bliss. "I know only 3 men who have used that particular brand of firearm, and I've personally killed 2 of them." "That's lucky for me then, Valentine," James Bond whispered. He did not even sense the other man until it was too late. A blackjack came down with a soft thud, and Bond fell into the darkness of unconsciousness. No, not lucky for you, Mr. Bond. Zukovsky purred.